In today's episode of the Back in Shape podcast, we're going to be talking about how you can prevent lower back pain as you age. And equally, if you do have lower back pain now, how you can overcome it and move forwards for the long term, reducing your likelihood of being plagued by it in the future. Unfortunately, back pain will occur to more or less all of us at some point or other. And we have the opportunity, generally speaking, to dictate whether it's going to be a minor bump in the road, something that we recover from and don't even think about, like a sprained ankle or something like that, or whether it's something that leads to a downward spiral in our general health and well-being. And really, it's how we prepare our body prior to any unfortunate incidences, because the overwhelming majority of lower back injuries are not severe injuries. You haven't fallen off a ladder on the second story while you were cleaning the windows outside. It's mostly benign, simple activities that leads to the occurrence of back pain and the worsening of back pain. And in many ways, a lot of these factors are preventable, they are rectifiable, and if we do the right things from this point henceforth, we really will find that we improve our overall back health significantly. So hopefully today it's going to be a little bit of a different podcast, a little bit enlightening, a little bit more chatty, so to speak, but hopefully it does really make you think about how you can move forwards to not only benefit yourself from a back health point of view, but also a general health and well-being point of view as well. This one thing which will really make a significant amount of difference. And I thought I'd start off by talking about this by posing a question. What if you had, maybe you're a little bit older watching this, maybe you're more retirement age, maybe you're younger, you haven't even had kids yet, wherever you may fall on that sort of age spectrum. What if in your 20s, in your teen years, you could have devoted unlimited financial resources, time resources, to get everything right, to build the best version of you possible? What would that look like? And even if we were able to do that, it's important to acknowledge that you might build a certain degree of capacity, a certain degree of strength, robustness, etc., to be on the Olympic stage even, perhaps. And over time, as you age, that's going to slowly degrade. It's just going to happen. Very few people would make the statement that arguably nobody, that an 80-year-old is going to be in better physical condition than a 25-year-old Olympian. It's just not going to happen. But the important thing to note is, yes, we do all decline with age, but so often that is used as an excuse to mean we can't possibly make any improvement. And I would put it to you that unless you're in that category and that you have devoted unlimited resources to make your body the best it could possibly be at a young age, and you've kept that up for your entire life, you probably have room for improvement. I know sometimes when you're in a lot of pain or you're very, very busy, etc., or your health isn't quite there, you think, I couldn't possibly be healthier than I currently am. I'm getting older. I can't do more. It's just one of those things I have to accept with age. But the reality is you will have the capacity to do significantly more than you currently are and never even reach a half, in most cases, of what your body was really capable had you, for the entirety of your life, had all the resources available. It's just about guiding you in the right sort of way. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the advantages of being a little bit older and a little bit younger. And we're also going to talk about some of those misconceptions and then kind of go through what should you do going forward. So when it comes to advantages and disadvantages, one of the things that I see a lot in people with back pain is they compare themselves to others. We go, well, I'm older, or I'm this, I'm that. I couldn't do that. And that's a real issue. And I thought I'd take two ends of the spectrum, two extremes for today to help draw this out, because it is such a common thing that you hear from patients in the clinic, from members, etc., is that the 20-year-old who's got some back pain, maybe they've injured a disc or something like that, they have youth on their side. Their body's going to respond faster. Maybe it's an L5S1 disc bulge. And that's their favor, okay? And people that are in their older years, on the other end of the spectrum, they will look back and say, well, I'm not young anymore. I can't heal quickly. Fair enough. But the younger people tend to, and this is the broad generalizations, okay, but they tend to be more impatient. Oh, why isn't it healed yet? They tend to be more rash, more swift with their recovery, with their return to activity. And that's when they get caught out. They go, oh, well, I'm feeling okay. I'll just jump straight back into my activities. And then they constantly get into this loop of getting back into exercise, re-injuring themselves because they're doing it too soon. They don't respect the healing times that are biological healing times. And although you feel better, healing hasn't taken place. So they go back into exercise too soon because of impatience, and then they re-injure themselves, and then they get into a cycle, and then they start saying, well, I can't do exercise. I'm just going to continue to injure myself. And that can be very depressing in our younger years. When we're older, yes, We do have disadvantages. We're going to be a bit slower. Some of the bodily mechanisms are going to be working against us. We need to make compensations for that. Just like when we're young, we need to make compensations for our expectations. Up here needs to be addressed and compensated for through education, etc. Understanding of how long these sorts of things take, changing our viewpoints, addressing some of the impatience that might be there, or expectation of just being able to bounce back. And when we're older, we need to address some of those expectations. Our protein intake, our body is slower than it could be. But as we're older, we tend to find that we have more wisdom. We are a little bit more resilient in terms of we're consistent with our application to a given task. We give it the time it requires to go through that process. Sometimes we can go a little bit slower than we actually should do. But we have advantages and disadvantages at all ages. When we're young, youth is on our side. When we're older, we've got more wisdom. We have more ability to focus and follow a plan for an extended duration to make sure we give our body time to make those changes. We tend to be less rash, less quick to move in one direction or the other, and we tend to follow one course. It tends to work better. So there are both advantages and disadvantages. And one thing that I see that really lets people down is that they focus on the disadvantages of their current circumstance, reasons why they can't be better, reason why they couldn't do this, reason why they can't do X. And actually taking a step back and focusing on the areas that you can do something with. Because if you only focus on what you can't do, when it comes to dealing with back pain or these other health measures, that's a very disempowering. If you focus on what you can't do, you just don't do anything. Whereas if you focus on the things you can really go headlong into those areas. And maybe in the process of that, you will discover that you can do extra things and you can add those extra things. What you can do starts to grow. And therefore you're able to do more things that complement the goal of maybe recovering from back pain, let's say. And those start to stack, start to accumulate, and start to have more and more compounding positive effects, as opposed to the opposite. The less you do, the less you can do. The more vulnerable you're going to become to injury, the more likely then you get another injury, then you do even less, and so on and so forth. And we can see this downward spiral happens and catches so many people out who maybe did start with a reasonable base of muscular strength and resilience, but because of a few maybe wrong turns, they've managed to fall into a downward spiral that means they do less and less and less and less and less and lose some of the attributes, the positive attributes their body had when they first had the injury. So we must try our best to focus on the positive side of things. And two more areas that really throw people off as they get older. And I'm talking about sort of reaching retirement age, maybe 5, 10, 15 years before that, and the years afterwards, is that older people should focus on low impact. And at the end of the day, as we get to this sort of retirement age, there's a whole number of decades ahead of us. We still have plenty of time to do things. We have plenty of activities, and you're seeing some extraordinary things online nowadays of people going into their 70s, into their 80s, doing tremendous feats of physical activity compared to what they might have been doing in their working life. We really cannot view that time as a wind down time and that we should focus on lower impact, because the common ones that people get told to focus on is do some cycling, do some walking, do some swimming. That'll keep you fit and strong and healthy as you go into your senior years. The big problem with this is that for many people, even if they haven't done explicit exercising, etc., in their younger years, the competence that their body has as they go through life is up here. And then they start saying, oh, well, I'm going to do some walking. Walking demands this much of your body. If you are not pushing your body, all that will happen is while you're doing your walking, you're under the false pretense that that's keeping you strong, fit, and healthy. All that's happening is your competence that you had over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years is just going down, 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 down till it meets what is required to just do walking. Walking is not a strenuous activity. It is not building strength. It is not building any of those things if you could already do it. You need to move to something that is better. And the big problem with that is, and we see this time and time again, people that get back injuries in their 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. They go, oh, well, I was doing walking. I was told that was keeping me strong, keeping my joints strong. And they get really disenfranchised because they thought they were doing something that was strengthening. And we've covered this in other podcasts specifically on walking, for example. But those activities are not keeping you strong. They are keeping you able to walk for a set distance. But when we have injuries, etc., they really set us back. And it's just not something that is building you up. It's just an activity. No different in many ways to many of the other ones. But they are not building you strength. So you get very disenfranchised if you think that walking is building your strength, when in actual fact it hasn't. And then you get an injury and get told, well, you're not very strong. And you go, well, I've been walking. Well, walking doesn't make strength. And that's an epiphany that can sometimes be quite troubling, quite difficult for people to move past when they think they've been doing the right sort of stuff and in fact they haven't. So that's the first thing, focusing on low impact activities, because all that happens is your body adjusts to the minimum necessary to allow you to function on a daily basis. So steer clear of those, or not steer clear of them, but they are something that can be done, that have their own benefits, but they are not building strength and keeping you strong. The next one is that older people, you can't do anything more strenuous because you might injure yourself. And I would put this to you again. The comparison of people at opposite ends of the spectrum on their life is that a young person is much more likely to be reckless, to be out there doing silly things and get themselves injured. An older person might well be more sensible, more conservative in their approach to new things, to make sure that they don't go and do something recklessly and injure themselves. They might pay more attention to technique, etc., when they're doing certain activities, so that they are less likely to have trouble, because you're a little bit more patient again. You're less likely to go off the handle and fire off in one direction and get yourself caught out, because you've got the wisdom of years behind you. And therefore, maybe that's not necessarily quite as true that older people are more likely to injure themselves. Maybe it's more a function of the proclivity of the individual to do certain things. And yes, maybe if you're more vulnerable in senior years, you might be more likely for a simple thing like a slip or a fall to injure you, but you're also less likely to do silly things that might result in those activities as well. So we have to bear that in mind when we're considering these things, and kind of not disregard those things, but push them to one side. Because what should we really do? Really, simple work works. The basics do work. And focusing on strengthening resistance-based exercises, the simple movements. We talk about them a lot on the podcast, in the program, the squat, the hip hinge, the reverse lunge, or the lunge in general. Why? Because these movements are movements that you're doing every single day. They're real to life. You could probably be better at them. And in the process of actually doing them, you'll discover that they have additional benefits that you hadn't realized. And one of those first benefits comes from doing strength training and starting out with the basics of mastering your technique. Doing those exercises with correct form. That, although when you start to get the technique right, you don't benefit from the strengthening improvements because that takes time. But getting that technique right, thinking about how you squat, how you do the reverse lunge, how you do some of the hip hinges, allows you to immediately start to make technical improvements that you then take a step back and go, well, I'm doing my squat every day when I'm getting out of the chair. I'm doing a hip hinge when I brush my teeth. I'm doing a lunge or a reverse lunge when I go up the stairs. And maybe you realize, I'm not so good at these movements, actually. And I'm wobbly. My knees are moving all over the place. I can't go very deep in the squat with good form. Maybe you start to realize that, maybe that's why my knees aren't so good. Maybe that's why my hips aren't so good. Maybe that's why I've got some arthritis in those joints, because I haven't actually been using them properly. For example, walking again. Your knee hardly bends when you do walking. It hardly bends at all. And then you realize, I can't really squat anywhere close to 90 degrees without losing competence, losing form, losing technique. And you go, well, that's not really going to keep my knee very healthy, is it? Because I'm hardly using my knee through its fullest range of motion. And therefore, what's that going to do to the ligaments, the tendons, the muscles that need to work at deeper ranges of motion and need to work synergistically with others at deeper ranges of motion? You start to realize that maybe that's an explanation. Maybe because I haven't been doing the strengthening work, my technique's been so bad without me even knowing, when I'm doing all of these activities around the house, getting out of chairs, going upstairs, etc. And the moment you start to become more aware of the technique of how to do a squat, a hip hinge, and the reverse lunge, you immediately, if we're sensible, start to apply that to the movements you're doing on a daily basis. You realize every time you've been going up the stairs for the last 10 years, your right knee folds in towards the left knee. And you realize, maybe that's why I'm getting some meniscus damage. Maybe that's why I keep straining my collateral ligaments. Maybe that's why I have such knee pain, because I'm not actually holding my knee. And every single time I go up that flight of stairs, my knee's wobbling all over the place. And I haven't ever taken a step back to go, actually, I need to learn to control this thing properly. And how do I do that? Through those simple exercises: squat, hip hinge, and the reverse lunge or the lunge. The first and last being maybe a little bit more appropriate in that particular example. So that's something to think about. Really getting you reflecting on starting doing this strength training, starting making improvements in your strength, your resilience, because the technical improvement that you get relatively quickly from reflecting on this has such wide-reaching and instantaneous benefits on your daily life. And that's only going to be a boon to your back pain recovery. And then the final thing, which is a little bit more of a negative one, I suppose, in some regards, or positive, depending on how you look at it, is that strength training will decrease your risk of mortality. The stronger you are as you age, the less likely, quite simply put, you are to die or suffer the consequences of a fall. It's predominantly about a fall, but as you are more resilient, you're less likely to fall. Falls are very, very closely linked to those decreases in those increases in likelihood of mortality. We all know someone in the family. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's an older family member, maybe it's an older family member or friend. They've had a fall. They were pretty active, doing things, independent, etc. They had a fall and boom, they were never the same again. And very quickly they deteriorated. Had they not had that fall, and it was maybe out in the house, it was out in the garden or wherever it was, they just lost their footing. Why? Yes, it might have been on the ice, we were out, and it could have happened to anyone. But the less resilient you are, the less we are doing these sorts of activities, strength training, etc., the more vulnerable we are to a fall. And falls, as we get into our senior years, post-retirement, are serious risks to life and limb. They are a problem. We just don't recover from them the same way, the more vulnerable we are. However, to the contrary, if we are stronger, if we're doing resistance training, like the ones that I mentioned a moment ago, we're going to have stronger muscles. We're going to have more balance. To do reverse lunges, for example, requires balance. Training it makes you better at it. Practice makes perfect. It doesn't matter what age you're at. It might be more difficult. You might be starting from a more difficult position, but it makes a huge difference practicing over the months and years and decades ahead. It really, really does. And that reduces the likelihood of that slip turning into a fall. The strength that you will benefit from adding load to your body through the course of doing these resistance exercises is what builds resilience in the bones, the connective tissue in your spine, the connective tissue in the other joints, the cartilage, etc., making those, again, more resilient. Rather than a piece of glass falling on the floor as you hit the ground from a fall, it's something like a piece of concrete or something like that. It's stronger. Your body is more resilient to those impacts. So if you are unlucky enough to have a fall, you have a more robust individual hitting the ground, less likely to suffer something like a hip fracture or something like that, less likely to be having a period of extended bed rest as a result of that, less likely to have your confidence knocked, less likely to have aches and pains afterwards, less likely to have a serious decline in your general well-being and health. It's very, very clear that is something that we want to avoid at all costs. And by being more diligent with our strength training and incorporating it, instead of just walking around, instead of just doing some cycling, instead of just doing some swimming, instead of just doing nothing or just some gardening, we actually start doing some strength training to improve the robustness of our bodies as we age. Nowadays, I've mentioned it many times before, we're seeing some really cool stuff online on social media of people in their senior years doing incredible feats. Only the other day, I was watching someone, I think we actually shared this on the social channel. It was someone in there, it was a guy in, I think, 73 or something like that. And he's squatting about 450 pounds, which is it's more than I'm squatting right now. It is a strong squat. And it just goes to show what is possible in years where common thought would dictate that we shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. Maybe that guy should just stick to walking. No. Looking at some of the measures on his bone densities, etc., in this particular example, you're seeing really, really good scores, really healthy scores, significantly healthier than many people that might be 20, 30 years younger. The body is a really awesome bit of kit. It adapts to what you put into it. If you don't put anything into it, it will adapt down, it will down regulate, it will weaken, it will become more vulnerable. But if you do commit to doing something that can amount to 30 to 45 minutes, 3, 4, or 5 times a week, then you can really offset some of the negatives that can come with age if we don't do anything. And the final thing on that is that often we say, well, I'm too busy. As we do move into our retirement years, our senior years, we do have more time. Yes, some of us will be very busy with social engagements, etc., but you can make time for that 30 to 45 minutes, 3, 4, or 5 times a week to really make some changes. And what that will do is that will allow you to continue to be active, continue to do the things you want, continue to be safe, robust, and enjoy the time ahead, rather than find that you are gradually able to do less and less and less, and one fall away from being able to not do the things you want and all of the negative consequences that come with that. So make a start to make strength training a healthy part of a healthy you routine. It doesn't have to be complex. Like we've mentioned, 3 exercises, the squat, the hip hinge, and the reverse lunge. You could substitute that for a split squat. You could substitute that for a forward lunge in the future. It's got a little bit more impact. We talk about that in other videos. And start to do those regularly. Focus first on the technique, then use those exercises to add resilience, add resistance, add weights slowly but surely over the weeks, the months, the years ahead. And you will find that that is the single biggest thing that you can do to reduce the likelihood of getting low back pain, and to reduce the severity should you be unlucky enough to have a fall or tweak yourself in some certain way that does aggravate the lower back, especially if we've got some degenerative change, etc. down there in the lumbar spine. It will make a massive difference to your longevity, and it's really worth getting started straight away. I know this has been a bit of a different podcast episode rather than our usual ones on the conditions, etc., but I do hope it's been helpful. I hope it's made you think a little bit about how seriously perhaps you've been taking this. Quite often we see people, and we hear about this from time to time, just a kind of an anecdote, that people will join the program, they'll do a little bit of exercises, for example, or maybe have been patients in the past. We'll explain all of this stuff in general. They'll do some exercises, they'll get maybe to phase 2, something like that. So doing some of the simple bodyweight only exercises, and then, I'm feeling good again. Great, they go off. And then they come back in a few years and they go, actually my back pain, it's still there, it's come back, etc. And it's because we haven't done the necessary stuff. If we build our strength, follow through, for example, in the Back in Shape program, the entirety of the program, start adding resilience. And the purpose of our phase 4, for example, where we're doing some of these exercises with load and we're encouraging ourselves to get stronger and stronger and stronger, is that we do that for the long term, whether it's with something like the Back in Shape program, whether it's other programs, whether it's just exercises that you've seen online. If you feel confident enough to do that and safe enough to do that, it doesn't matter, but make sure you commit to do it for the long term, not just a short period while you've got an injury, while the pain is motivating you to do so. Take this on board, hopefully, and make it part of what you do every day, just the same as brushing your teeth, just the same as getting dressed every morning. If you do make it a permanent feature in your weekly life, that 3, 4, or 5 times a week, you really will thank yourself for the long term, because you will find that as you go through the aging process, whether you're 20, 30, 50, 65, 70, or in your 80s watching this video right now, you will find very, very quickly that as you go through the aging process and you look around at your contemporaries, at your peers, at your other half, maybe they're not necessarily on board with it, but most of the time they tend to be, because they see you very intimately making those changes. But you'll see others of your age group starting to fall by the wayside and not able to do the things that you are still able to do. And although that's a shame in many cases, hopefully you can encourage some of those people as well to start to get on board with these sorts of exercises, these sorts of practices, because it really can improve our longevity in dramatic ways. And we've said that I'll close with this. We've said this many times before, and I don't have the exact reference here, but it's something that you're seeing more and more about, more and more online. If exercise, resistance-based exercise like this, was a pill, it would constantly be sold out. Everybody would want it. Everyone would be taking it. The problem is that it requires a little bit of sacrifice. It requires a little bit of work on your part to do, and that sometimes can put people off, but it is well worth it. So hopefully today's episode has been helpful. If you do have any comments, any questions, anything that made you think on this episode of the podcast, post it in the comment section below. We read and reply to all of those, and it'd be interesting to see how you guys find this or have found this particular episode. As always, thanks for watching. If you do know someone that could benefit from this message, consider sharing it with them. Remember, you can always subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the weekly episodes as they come out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.